Excellent. Well, let's get into things. Today, we wanted to take an opportunity to really deep dive into the findings from our latest Viva Engage Benchmarking Report. So we launched this report only a few weeks ago, and we've had a massive amount of downloads and interest in the findings. You know, over the years, people love benchmarking insights to help, really understand what good looks like on these platforms and how to get there. Today we have some fantastic speakers. We're going to be sharing the key insights. We'll be hearing from Fiona from Westpac, New Zealand. So let's get into things. Actually, or maybe I'll do it after just this. 1 second. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're hosting today's session. I'd like to acknowledge the Dafenjung people. I'm based here on the central coast of New South Wales. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. As we go through, please, by all means, introduce yourselves in the chat. We've got the chat and we've also got Q&A running today. So if you'd like to ask any questions directly to any of today's presenters, please do pop questions in Q&A. Any extra commentary, any extra, bits and pieces you'd like to add, please jump in the chat. If you want to jump into the conversation as well, you can use the raise hand feature. Otherwise, you can show your support by using reactions and all of those wonderful things too. Today we'll be going through, of course, the key findings from our benchmarking report, which we've just released. We'll make sure that we share some handy quick links for you as well if you haven't had the opportunity to download and have a read through. There's lots of great stuff in there, so I strongly encourage that you get your hands on the report. It's free. Then we'll, as a part of the benchmarking, we do also announce winners every single year of the top performing Viva Engage networks based on all of the wonderful engagement analytics that you can access from within Swoop, of course. So we'll be announcing those winners. Then we'll have a Q&A with Fiona Roberts from Westpac, New Zealand. And Fiona is speaking on behalf of the top performing medium-sized organisation identified as a part of the study. Westpac, New Zealand, of course, have actually been consistently extremely high performers as a part of the Viva Engage study that we run every year. So Fiona is just a wealth of insight on what it takes to run one of these networks really effectively. So we're really excited to hear more from Fiona a little bit later on in the session. But otherwise, just to give you a quick roundup of the sort of official presenters and people here on the call today, we've got Dr. Lawrence Lockley from Swoop, who's our Chief Data Scientist, and Laurie will be running through all of the key findings. And of course, being one of the authors of the report, was responsible for crunching the numbers and finding those interesting patterns and trends that sort of carried us throughout this year. Fiona, of course, from Westpac, New Zealand. We'll be learning more about Fiona and her story in just a moment. We have Sharon from Swoop as well. Sharon writes all of the fantastic case study stories in our benchmarking reports and any of the case study stories that you find on our website. Coco, I'm not sure if Coco's here, but Coco is our director for North America. And myself, I look after the APAC region alongside my colleague Fran, who's also here. Fran looks after marketing and customer success in the APAC region too. So hello, welcome, and let's get into things. I couldn't keep carrying on though until I just gave one little quick shout out to our Viva Engage Festival coming up on the 6th of December. If you haven't had the opportunity to register for this just yet, right now, you need to open up a browser tab or use the QR code. We'll drop a link in the chat for you. Register. It's about a half-day event. We're running it kicking off from about midday if you're on the east coast of Australia. But we've got some amazing speakers locked in for this year. If you're looking for inspiration for how to run a really great Viva Engage network, if you're looking for ideas for highly engaging communities, highly engaging campaigns, if you want to hear directly from Swoop and from Microsoft as well, of course, this is the #1 Viva Engage focused event, aside from this one, for this year. So please do make sure you register. There's a few different time zones you can pick from if you are joining us perhaps from the US today, or I'm sure many of you from here in Australia. And alongside the event as well, we, in the spirit of recognition and celebration, especially towards the end of the year, We do also have our Viva Engage Community Champion Award running. The nominations are currently open, but the deadline is coming up very, very soon on the 30th of November. Again, there's a QR code, but if you check the chat, there should also be a quick URL for you to head to submit a nomination. This is just to recognise anyone within your organisation who you would consider to be a Viva Engage champion. It could be somebody in internal comms. It could be someone who looks after channels. It could be someone who's a super passionate community admin. It could be one of your influencers or somebody who just seems to really drive a lot of engagement on your network and really understands the value and drives that throughout the organisation too. So have a think about who that might be. It could also be people that are here on the call today as well, of course. Make sure you get some nominations in, because we are so excited to recognise those people alongside Microsoft as well, of course. This will be our 3rd year of running this award, so please do get involved. Alrighty, so now we'll be getting on to sort of chatting through some of the key findings from this year's report. And to kick this off, Laurie, I'll bring you in to share all of the wonderful insights from this year.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Well, as usual, we've got a big sample of organisations in our benchmarking this year, nearly 100 organisations. We purposely limit the sort of period that you want to go through with our benchmarking. So typically, every organisation is benchmarked for 6 months worth of activity, generally within a 2-year period. And obviously, we wanted to select that period so that we're covering that transition from, the COVID period and into whatever this period is, whether we call it the hybrid period or what have you. So we purposely selected organisations that we had data for in that area. So as I said, sort of 97 organisations. We also collect information about communities, so over nearly 5,000 active communities, and of course, 5 million employees. So the numbers are always big, and from a statistical perspective, there's plenty of data there. So we're always very comfortable with the size of the samples we get. So back to you, Emily.
Yeah, all good. I think as a part of the report, and if you have already gone through and digested the findings in the report, you might already be across some of the trends that we're about to get into. But we thought, sometimes these findings do surprise us as well. And we wanted to maybe get a sense check from the people here on the call about what you think maybe some of the results are for this year. So we've got a quick poll question that will be popping up in just a moment on your screen. And I want to know what you think the average active participation rate is on Viva Engage. Now, if you're thinking about all of the organisations globally currently using Viva Engage, what is the percentage of people who are actively participating? So we're talking posting, replying, reacting, not necessarily reading. Posting, replying, reacting. What do you think is the answer to this one? Got a few options. We made it multi-choice, make it a little bit easier for you. So let's see what the answers come through as. Hopefully that's running. Okay, so we've got the majority so far. We've got 23 responses, so there might be a few more people who need to jump in. It looks like the majority have gotten the question correct, which is good to see. So perhaps we've got, a nice percentage of people who have already been reading the report. Good to hear. So the answer is actually 27%. Laurie will be getting to this in just a moment, but I think sometimes there is a perception that maybe that active participation rate is much higher. We actually are seeing, and I'm sorry to touch on this before Laurie gets to it, but the readership as well is something that seems to go, through the roof as well. And it can, to have some of these benchmarks too, if you haven't had the opportunity to look closely at benchmarking, perhaps you're not currently able to run a tool like Swoop alongside your network. Sometimes when you are setting those goals, it's really hard to know what good looks like. You might think, well, is every other organization, hitting 80, 90, 100% active participation rate? And the reality is they aren't. Of course, there's some that might be way up there doing really fantastic things. But when we look at those global averages, it is currently for this year at 27%. So thank you for participating in that one. Laurie, onto our first finding.
Okay, so in terms of readership levels, I mean, they're consistently higher, and this has sort of come from pretty much the period when Microsoft opened up Viva Engage through Outlook and through Teams, and we're sitting up around the 80-85% of the organisation reading posts, but as you've seen, the active participation is at 27%, and that is actually a little lower than we've seen, and I'll talk a little bit about that later in later insights. So 58% of people are reading but not participating in Viva Engage conversations. So you've seen that, the theme for this webinar is from content to conversations. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but clearly you can see there's an opportunity there for us to get people more actively engaged. The next slide, Emily. We moving the next?
Yep, we're on the next one, Laurie.
Yeah.
Oh, are we? Why aren't I seeing it?
Let me toggle back and forth.
Okay, that's better. Okay, so as we said, sort of with 27% and 58% are reading only, we've got a strong opportunity to bring people into the into this sort of active participation. And I might say that, like this sort of participation rate is one of the higher measures where there's a big variance between organisations. Right now, you could probably appreciate that if you're a smaller organisation, it's probably easier to get 70 or 80% of the people working with Viva Engage than if you're a huge bank with 50,000 people and so forth. So 27% is the average, but the highest is up there around the 60-70%, and I think even Fiona, your organisation, I think you're sitting around the 40% for an organisation with about 8,000 people, I think. So clearly it's doable, and you can see that it's achievable. I don't know, Fiona, if you want to talk a little bit about how you build participation, but we do custom benchmarks all the time, and pretty much we sort of know what helps with participation, and often it's basically leaders and culture. But I don't know if you've got a word to say about how you build participation, Fiona?
Well, I would not recommend the way that we've done it to everybody else, because we've built a very strong connected community off the back of some very unfortunate things that have happened in New Zealand. We've had a series of disasters. We've had a very bad cyclone that impacted New Zealand this year. We've had earthquakes in Christchurch and Wellington, in other cities. Those things actually have really cemented how we communicate with each other. We've used Viva Engage specifically to get our network to sort of rally around each other and to support each other. That very strong connection has been sustained over time, and so we kind of use those things, I guess, as a springboard to build our community into a very tight-knit community.
Okay, thank you.
Laurie,
so maybe we go to the next.
Just before you go there, Fiona, it's really interesting you saying that too. I think that's something that a lot of community managers on this call could maybe take away, that it's not specifically just work focused, but more what's affecting your people, and looking at the whole picture. I guess getting people onto the platform that way is quite interesting.
Yeah, not recommended, but we have we have been able to use it as a springboard, for people to really connect in with each other and build those very strong networks.
Yeah,
okay,
really interesting. And Laurie, we've got a question here from Michael, just on the slide previously. So do those reading stats, the 85% of people who are reading Viva Engage, does that does it just count folks who intentionally browse Viva Engage, or might it include those who passively view posts that are embedded in SharePoint intranet pages, for example?
Well, I think, I don't know if I can answer that totally accurately, but I know that if they're reading it through a Teams sort of channel or through Outlook, that would count as well. So it's pretty much,
I can probably jump in here. I can probably jump in here because we know that if you open, depends on how it's being done and like how much you open. But if you could, for instance, in Outlook, you get a summary with the conversations in Viva Engage. And if you open that email and some of those, if you can see the conversation, for instance, in Outlook, it'll trigger it as seen in Viva Engage as well. SharePoint probably works, from my experience, at least, the same way that if you do something intentional to like actually open the message, if it's just a preview, then it doesn't count. But the moment you've done just a little bit more, then it does count. You can probably test it yourself by trying for one day only to read messages on Outlook and SharePoint, and then just the following day go back and look at Viva Engage. You'll see that little count, the unread count, and see whether that matches things that you have actually already read in SharePoint or Outlook.
Thanks,
Okay.
Kai.
Thank you. So we can go to the next slide, Emily. Tell me if it's there because mine's not seen. Oh, okay. Yep, I'm here. Okay, so one thing we have noticed, and it's I guess it is a theme through this report, is that the amount of information sharing or announcemements or what we're calling broadcasting is actually increasing. So we're sort of seeing that the platform is being used for announcing things and so forth. And there's a reason for that. I think that, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but internal communications is becoming more of a natural owner for Viva Engage now. That wasn't the case when it was in the early days of AMER. So we are seeing features even from Microsoft that are sort of relating to the needs of internal communicators. So that sort of content, sort of broadcasting, is getting a lot more attention. Unfortunately, I think that is, to some sense, at the expense of the core of what AMER was and Viva Engage is the communities and the conversations within communities. And and I'll talk a little bit about our whole maturity move later on. But clearly, being informed is one thing, but if you're going to generate sort of really tangible outcomes for your organisation, there is a gap between being informed and actually doing stuff. So let's leave that for a later conversation in this talk. But I just wanted to highlight that.
Yes, so I'll jump in here with one of the examples. You saw we were talking about conversation-based communities were the high achieving and the high performing communities. So as well as benchmarking all of the Viva Engage networks, which take into account like all your top performing Viva Engage communities as well as those poor performing ones. So that was one measure that we came for the overall champions. But Laurie also did a deep dive into about 5,000 thriving communities. So these were communities that he measured on two-way relationships, sentiment, growth, consistent activity, all of those sorts of things. And Medibank, who in APAC we're mostly familiar with, it's Australia's largest private health insurer, they came out number 2 for their Medibank community, which is actually, it used to, up until a month or so ago, it was called the Medibank Retail Viva Engage Community. It connects about 400 frontline workers in Medibank across 80, it's more than 80 stores across Australia. And overall, actually, their Viva Engage network also ranked number 2 in the world for medium-sized organisations, which was interesting. So primarily, this Medibank community, it's used for daily updates across all of the 80 stores and connecting all those frontline workers, but also with people behind the scenes as well. So they do lots of recognition of employees' anniversaries, celebrating business successes, lots of health and wellbeing initiatives. And I use the example there like Are You OK Day. And we had a really great interview, which is all in it's a case study in the report, speaking with Andrew Carlson, who runs all the retail stores across Australia. And there's some really nice quotes there you can read about the connection that it creates using Viva Engage. But he had some really great examples. There was one the day before we spoke with him. He'd walked into a meeting in Melbourne in Medibank's headquarters, and there was a senior leader who was on the phone to one of the frontline team members because he'd seen a post on Viva Engage saying it was that person's 20th work anniversary. So he'd picked up the phone to call this person to congratulate them, thank them for their work at Medibank. And he was saying that for a lot of leaders, it's just a way to have this connection with the front line and feel like that they're part of the team. Another way they use it is for senior leaders is to post visits to stores in the Medibank community to show that they're out and about meeting people. What was really interesting when we spoke with Andrew is he actually personally doesn't like to put selfies up on his store visits. What he does is he encourages people within the stores to take photos and share their perspective of what it was like to have him in the store, what they discussed, share a few selfies there as well. So we've got a screenshot. I should have made that a little bit bigger, I'm sorry, but you can see some comments. So this was one, it was a fun run, I think, in the Gold Coast that he went into, and he really makes the effort to go in and comment on posts. So he was saying he's not a daily poster. It was in that last quote there from him. He's not a daily poster, but he always goes in and comments and likes and tags people into conversations. So just a really good example to what Laurie was speaking about making communities conversation based, and they're the high performing communities. This is just one example of how they're doing it.
Thank you. So, okay, insight number 4. For the first time in the 9 years that we've been doing it, a large size organisation, so that's an organisation with over 8,000 active employees, was ranked the highest overall for the whole network. So, you know, this and actually just pipping our winner from last year, which was Westpac New Zealand, as a medium-sized organisation, which was the best in 2022. So what we've seen the last 2 years is that organisations larger than the small organisations, which historically had been the ones that we've found it easier to perform on Viva Engage than the larger ones, had been picked by larger organisations. And I think what this is telling us is we know Westpac New Zealand, we know ANZ, who is the large organisations, they carefully manage, they do manage their communities, they manage their network, and it really shows that, you know, independent of size, size doesn't have to matter. You know, if you manage the network, you will get the results. And I think this is quite telling for us. It's not to say it's still not easy and we still don't have more smaller organisations at the top, but what it does prove that if you put the effort in, it doesn't matter how big you are, you will get the results. So I think this is a very, very positive finding. We were surprised last year and we're even more surprised this year. So that's wonderful. And I think there's a little bit of toing and froing between the banks, friendly banter, I think, on this, and I'm sure the 2024 will be even more competitive. So let's move on from there.
So the friendly banter Laurie's referring to is last year, Westpac New Zealand, thanks to Fiona, ranked number 1 overall. And last year was the first time we had a winner that wasn't a small size organisation. And then this year, it was actually ANZ who was pipped Westpac New Zealand for the number 1 spot. But as Laurie was saying, they have lots of community management, so we'll go into that in a moment. But it wasn't just something that happened overnight with ANZ. They work and work and work at this. I'm not sure whether we've got anybody on the call from ANZ at the moment, but I know Fiona will attest to this. It's not something that just happens overnight. And I just wanted to share the list of the journey. So yes, they're number 1 this year, but they weren't always that case. They've worked up to this for years. So what's been really great is because they have, since 2019, they made it into the top rankings of our benchmarking. And each year we've done case studies, and it's been a really interesting journey for us to be able to watch what they're doing each year from a distance. So in 2019, it really started with the CEO, Shane Elliott, at the helm. And he was using Yammer to ask questions of people, really listening to answers, responding. So he put in a fair bit of work And there's some great case studies on our website from 2019. 2020, obviously COVID-19 hit us, and they said Yammer went berserk at ANZ. So every week Shane Elliott was doing a webcast. The link was shared into the Yammer Q&A community, and people could ask questions in there before and during and after each one of these weekly updates. So again, he was really at the helm then. From 2021, it was interesting. It's obviously started to become part of the culture at ANZ, and that's where we saw Shane Elliott really start to take more of a backseat role. So I don't think he's even on the most influential people list any longer, because he's not needed to be there. It's part of the culture now. People go to Viva Engage to ask questions, to find solutions, to share knowledge. And in this year's benchmarking report, there's a fantastic case study about a phishing scam. It was a phishing, like it was from their security team, and it was a phishing email that they sent out, a fake one, to every employee. And somebody in the security team popped a post on Viva Engage straight away to say, hey, heads up, this is a fake email that we're doing as security testing. Don't fall for it. And so some people were immediately saying, why would you alert everyone to this security drill? But in fact, it's best practice because it gets out to everybody immediately, and no one really fell for the scam because they got the notification via Viva Engage. So just a really good example of you know, how it comes full circle, that people now have the culture of going to Viva Engage to communicate. And there's just one more slide, Emily, on this. So a lot of you on the call, I'm sure, are familiar with Ryan from ANZ, and he looks after or one of the team that looks after Viva Engage at ANZ. And there's just a few quotes there from him. He's really making the point that it all grows over time. This is not something that's just happened overnight. It's taken years to get to this point where Viva Engage becomes part of their culture of sharing information. So just some really nice quotes there from him, and you can read the full story in the benchmarking report.
Now, before we get into our next finding, we also wanted to ask you, let me just organise the poll question for you so you can get involved. Of course, we go through each of the measures every year and we see which ones have been the biggest movers. Of course, sometimes we have some metrics that will increase and that will improve. Some metrics, they can move backwards. So I want to, you know, what you think. What engagement metric improved the most this year? Now, if you're not super familiar with Swoop, I'll just do a real quick run through of what these are. The Curiosity Index is looking at the proportion of questions being asked on your network. Interactive Users is looking at the percentage of people who are posting, replying, and reacting. The Response Rate is looking at the percentage of posts that receive a response in the form of replies for this one. And the Mention Index is looking at the percentage of posts that include an @mention or a tag in the post. So which metric do you think was the most improved? Okay, people must be reading the report, which is really good to see. So yes, indeed, it was the Mention Index that was the most improved, which Laurie will get to in just a moment. We'll also touch on maybe some of the metrics that maybe weren't as bigger movers as well, but let's have a look at that just now. Thanks, Laurie.
Okay, I'm just going to move that off my screen. Yeah, well, I mean, the mentioning has been pretty much on the upward trajectory for years, so basically, but for whatever reason, I don't know what it was this last year, it really skyrocketed. So for some reason, people have really caught on to mentioning. Now I think, you know, leaders naturally have done this sort of thing, but I think, you know, more broad-based sort of users are now mentioning a lot, and I think it's important because it brings people into the conversation, you know, so, or at least it alerts to them some information that might be relevant to them. So we also saw some more modest sort of increases in the responder persona, which is, you know, how often people react or reply. And that's good too. We call the responder persona our caregiver persona, so that people make sure that people get some sort of feedback. Also, I guess the public communities. I mean, we sort of see that Viva Engage is a space for public communities. So we clearly encourage communities to be open. We can't see too many reasons for a community to be closed, especially now that we've had teams for a number of years. So it's good to see that still growing as well. And I think we should be up to the final insight, Emily, now. So, okay, so this is probably the big one. So the reason we've got this theme from content to conversations is that a number of our sort of key metrics for conversations, that's the engager, the catalyst persona, the influence risk, the two-way relationship measure, those have sort of been slowly dropping over the last few years, or at least some of them are staying flat. Whereas before COVID, they were increasing, quite healthily. So what we're actually seeing as a proportion, there's less conversation than we've seen before. As I said, the 27% interaction, that started when we first started benchmarking that measure, we were in the 30s and in the mid 30s, in fact. So we are seeing a sort of disturbing trend depending on your point of view. Now, I've written a piece for rework which should come out pretty soon, reflecting on why is this so? Because, and I guess my take on it is that when Yammer first came up, this is even before Microsoft bought Yammer, it was very much a tool that we, at the time, as knowledge management consultants and specialists, thought this was our answer for sharing. This is our answer to sharing what we'd call tacit knowledge. So this is the knowledge that isn't codified and kept as information. It's things that you can share through conversation. So very much in the early days, Yammer was owned by the knowledge management community. But what we've seen since I think since COVID and just a little bit before the COVID is that natural ownership has moved to internal communications. And there's a reason for that, because at the beginning of COVID, the leaders were going on board, sort of the purview of internal communications to support leaders in their communication. That actually happened during COVID. So at that point in time, we started to see internal communications become the natural owner of Viva Engage /Yammer. Now, that's not a bad thing. In fact, it was a good thing in a way because it broadened the audience. So before internal communications was more active, we probably had, 40–50% people knowing about Yammer, but, as you've seen, we're up over the 80–85% now. And I think that's largely because it was being used as a communications tool. But what I'd like to say, though, is that as internal communications takes this natural ownership role, it comes with a responsibility. And part of that is to start to facilitate the communities and facilitate the conversation. So this transition from content, which is a natural home for communications professionals, to conversations is a difficult one, and one that I think that internal communications professionals will be challenged with. But, they're in that space now. And I think it's important they appreciate that, it's not just publishing content, but facilitating conversations. And thankfully, with our interviews, we've seen a lot of this happening with some of the leading internal communications people that we've talked to, and a good example of that would be, where do you publish news, for example? Most people said we publish news on the intranet, SharePoint Online, and we measure that as well in our SharePoint tool. But a couple of organisations said, no, we've moved our news into Viva Engage. And they've done that for two reasons. One is because they wanted it to be interactive two-way, not one-way. And the other one is to distribute the editorship and who writes news and so forth. So they wanted to broaden the base of people that contributed content and also turn it into a conversation. So I can see that this intranet news versus Engage news is going to be a discussion topic for probably the next year or two. And we're not falling on either side, but it's just a very interesting perspective. But I think it's important as internal communications people to think about, well, let's actually go to the next slide, I think. It's probably not this one. This one here. This is our maturity model, which we've had since the beginning. What we've done this year is we've simplified the language in terms of the the main stages: content, conversations, outcomes, right? And what we've been talking about here is the transition from content to conversations. So once we have conversations, we start to build relationships between people. So it's people-to-people engagement. And once you start to do that, then you can start to actually do things collaboratively. And when you do things collaboratively, you get outcomes. And we can measure that as well through the strength of the relationships we're seeing. So it's important to look at this maturity. Now, I should say it looks sort of linear. It doesn't always work that way, but it sort of largely sort of works that way. But, you can jump forwards and backwards. You can find communities that are right up there in the outcomes level while the rest of the organisation is still doing content. You can see all of that sort of stuff, but it's important to keep this in mind when you're thinking about Viva Engage, that the end game isn't just the content, right? So, that's just the beginning of it. If you're an external communications person, content could be enough because you might be engaging with your customers, you might be providing a website that attracts advertisers and what have you. But as internal communicator, that's just the beginning of the journey, right? And it starts with content, but it has to move through conversations and then eventually to outcomes. So I think this is an important point for people on the call that come from the internal communications. You have a new responsibility now to sort of move that content through the conversations and through to the outcomes, as in fact AMER and now Viva Engage has been designed for. So let's move on to this slide, which I think is for you, Sharon.
Yes, so these are our champions for 2023-24 Viva Engage Benchmarking. So as we said, ANZ was #1 overall for large size organisations, and in the APAC region, so we broke things down into the APAC region, the Americas and EMEA. So for APAC, we had ANZ as #1 for large size, Westpac New Zealand for #1 for medium size organisations, and Engage Squared for our small size organisation champions. So congratulations to everybody there. And we've got some US people on this call. So for our US ones, we had the Home Depot as #1 for the US. The medium-sized organisation was they decided to remain anonymous this year, but we've got plenty of case studies from them from previous years. And the small size organisation is Real Foundations, which is another one that's often amongst our leaders in all of our benchmarking across M365, Teams and Viva Engage. So I'm going to move on to the next one to present Fiona with your certificate, your digital certificate as the champion. So congratulations. So we're going to have a chat to Fiona. Oh, lovely bow. I'm going to have a chat to Fiona, and we thought we'd just focus on one aspect of what's been happening at Westpac New Zealand this year. And Fiona shared a story with us about, if you can move to the next slide, please, Emily, about Westpac New Zealand's Chief Information Officer, Russell Jones. So at the beginning of August this year, Russell was nowhere to be seen on the most influential people list on the SWIP dashboard. In fact, he wasn't even amongst the top 100. But a month later, he'd shot to #2 on the most influential people list, and now he is a regular up at the list. So we've got Fiona here to tell us, how did he do it, and how can you help everyone else to, I guess, encourage their leaders to do the same thing? Fiona, is Russell on Viva Engage all the time? Is that how he became an influencer?
No. No. I guess we've always looked at, this friendly rivalry that we have with ANZ. We've always looked at them and thought, wouldn't it be amazing if our leaders were on Viva Engage all the time? That would be incredible. And we've always really struggled in this area. And if we were to look at Russell specifically, he's a very sporadic poster and always has been. He's dipped in and out when he sees something of interest. If I was to look at him today, however, he's much more consistent in the way that he uses Viva Engage. So what I do know with him is that he does a post at least once a week, which is his kind of business update to his area, which is technology, and that's the one that's really kind of newsy and interesting. What's going on? Great wins in his area. Calling out people for service anniversaries or fantastic work that they've done. And we know that those posts go particularly well. But across the week, you know, he might be in a couple of times a week, and mostly he's just looking at other people's posts and making sure that he's, you know, he's replying to those, that he's tagging people in. So he's both consistent and kind of ad hoc as well.
Yeah, so it's not something that you have to dedicate specific time for each week, just do it ad hoc. So can you tell me a little bit about, you know, this all happened so quickly. He went from nothing to the top so quickly. What prompted him to become so engaged on Viva Engage?
I think being a relatively new Chief Information Officer, he was looking for some great ways to really connect in with his people. I think some of those more traditional channels weren't really giving him the feedback that he was looking for. So he worked with his internal communications manager and looked at Viva Engage specifically. How could he take some of those more traditional channels and actually engage with his people in a much easier, much more authentic way? And I think that's really paid off for him.
We've shared this slide now on the screen, which were just some quotes from the case study that Russell had, you know, that direct feedback loop and cutting back on emails. And I think this was a really good comment here too, that he wants honest feedback, both good and bad. And, you know, when you're having those conversations on Viva Engage, it's probably much easier to raise some of the bad things, whereas it's more difficult or confronting perhaps to send an email to your CIO with things that you may have concerns about, whereas when it becomes a conversation, I guess it's more open. So there's some really interesting quotes there that, you know, other people on the call may be able to use this to help if they want to encourage their leaders to come on. So Fiona, once Russell then had made the decision to go on to Viva Engage, what logistics were involved? I mean, did you have to create a whole new community for him? Did you have to do like bulk invites? Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
Well, it was actually relatively simple because there was an existing Viva Engage community, and it was an old one. It hadn't really been given much love or attention. People weren't really using it, and it's sort of fallen into disuse, I guess, if you could say that. So, what I did for him was just pick up that community and refreshed it. So we gave it a bit of a clean up, removed some of the old posts. Gave it a new feel, a new banner, a new name, and really kind of enabled him to start afresh. It had probably about 900 people in, I think. So what I did was just take a cut of data from his business unit and uploaded that to make sure that everybody in his area was involved in that community, but actually lots of people have since joined that are not part of the tech community and just enjoy his posts and want to stay up to date with all of the new things happening in the tech space.
Oh, that's really nice. So people who are not involved in technology at all. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's really good. And so was he coached on how to use it? Did you have to sit down and say, this is exactly what you've got to do? Or was it just authentic?
Right in the beginning, he did work with his internal communications person, but that was more in terms of coming up with a regular template that he could follow. So some things that he might want to do on a regular basis, which is obviously around calling out service anniversaries and birthdays and things like that. But in actual fact, it is in his voice, and he has continued to do it in his voice. and he has his own particular style now, which is quite hilarious because he uses a lot of emojis, and every week it's what emojis can he come up with, and it seems to be hotly anticipated every week. What is Russell going to do this week that's going to surprise us?
I can see the emojis there. So he probably, I'm guessing he probably does some of them on his phone then as well, like that previous one about going skiing. Yeah, he's just done that. And so just following some of the best practices here, you can see there's heaps of tagging going on. I can see down there he's actually linked to another Yammer conversation as well. So following just some of those basic things that can be quite helpful to get more people engaged. And I saw earlier, like there was just even in that technology community, there was like 2,500 seen by posts in the next one. Actually, that's the first one, was about 950, and then he's up to 2,500. So obviously a lot of people are seeing it and engaging. Yeah. So I think in the next slide, we just shared our SWIP tip, which is one that I think everyone can also share with their leaders. And we can share it in the chat too, so you can download if you're interested. But this is a really great rule that we came up with. We call it the 1, 2, 3 rule. So for every one post, make 2 replies and 3 reactions. So Fiona, from your experiences, if leaders were to follow this, you're on the money?
Look, absolutely. And we did talk to him about the 1, 2, 3 rule, but he seems to have grasped it quite quickly, that what he needs to do is just make sure that he's replying to everything. But also if he sees a post in another community that's on a subject that he's passionate about, to get in there and do his own response to that. And, he really does follow the rules. And I think it's more instinctive than I've got to remember to do this. Yeah, it's coming completely naturally to him now.
Yeah, and within a few weeks, right? Because this will happen within a month, so it's not something that's a really hard task to do.
No, I think the beauty of what he does is he's really taken to it like a duck to water, and he suddenly realized, oh, I can do this off my phone when I'm out and about. So if he's going to see a branch, if he's with some other GMs doing something in particular, he was at a new data center the other day, very quick to just take a photo on his phone and post it straight away. And I can see him doing that much more often these days.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if we just go to the next slide, Emily, this was a screenshot that Fiona shared with us from their SWIP dashboard, and there he is at number 2, and is in, with lots of people engaged. So great. But I believe, Fiona, this has had a little bit of a flow-on effect. Can you tell me how Russell's changes have influenced other leaders across Westpac New Zealand?
Well, look, we've called out his amazing behaviour, and we've shared this information with the rest of the executive team. So my general manager is very good at singing the praises of Viva Engage and what's going on with the rest of his peers. So what that's really done is prompted a lot of conversation and very, very healthy or perhaps unhealthy competition. So then now they've all, since Russell started his community and has really got that running and thriving, all of the other GMs have done something very similar. They've all refreshed or started new communities and are using it to bring in their regular business unit updates and update their teams. So that is going fantastically for us. I think what we have observed through this process is not just about the competition and, I'm using Viva Engage, but actually it's made our general managers better communicators over the whole. That they've actually realized that the way to create engagement with their respective teams is to be really authentic and to be open to that feedback and open to having those conversations, and to use Viva Engage as that platform to do it. And they're all doing, might I say, a fantastic job of that.
That's the Viva Engage dream, right? That's what
That's
everyone would
living the
aspire
dream.
to.
They're not all as good as that, but the ones who are putting in the effort are really getting the results. What we'd love to do is link this to our engagement survey to actually see if there's correlation. So watch this space.
Oh, share with us. And so, Fiona, is Russell still ranked number 2? We wrote, this was till the end of August.
Yep.
Is he still ranked number 2, or has he had some? Oh, he's not. Tell us what's happened.
No, upset, big upset. He's not number 2 anymore. He is still in the ranked in the top 10. So he's been thoroughly consistent over that time. But he's not number 2. He's been pipped at the post by we've got a new acting GM for our consumer network, and he's been pipped at the post by her in the last, I looked at it this morning, just in the last couple of weeks, because she's just started and she's, posted a lot and she's out there busily engaging with everyone. But we do actually have one other GM also in the top 10, so that's phenomenal, because we're coming from a base of I was going to say poor participation. It sounds very negative, but we didn't have GMs sort of sitting in that top 10.
Yeah. Okay, so everyone give me a thumbs up if this is the problem that you'd like to have, where your acting GM is overtaking your chief information officer on your most influential people list. Yes, I think it's. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask Fiona, just about how they've done this, or anything that you can jump in, either raise your hand, jump in and ask a question, or ask it in the chat if you've got any questions for Fiona. Well, think about that anyway, and I'll just hand over to you, Emily. Thank you, Fiona, but stay tuned in case we have some questions coming your way.
Excellent. Thank you again, Fiona. Thank you for sharing your story. Really, really appreciate it. But before we wrap up, of course, everything that we've been running through today has been off the back of the latest benchmark report that we've released. I know the links have been shared a few times in the chat, but I wanted to know just one final really, really easy poll question. I want to know if your organization has actually or ever been benchmarked for Viva Engage. I know there's many Swoop customers here on the call at the moment, but if you haven't, if you're really interested to know how you might stack up on the global scale, please do get in touch. We provide free custom benchmark reports for organizations that run free trials of Swoop for Viva Engage. So if it's something that you'd like to get a bit of a benchmark or a baseline for, especially, as we head towards the end of 2023, if you want to start fresh for 2024 with some really clear goals and to really understand the opportunities that are ahead of you, then if the answer is no, for example, then, by all means, please do get in touch. We do have some, you can fill in a form on our website, or if you have my details, more than happy for you to reach out to me directly, and we can get you all set up and have a fabulous custom report, which is written by Laurie, who's obviously gone through all of the findings in the report today. Something that I strongly encourage, and please do take advantage of that offer as well.
And it's all anonymous too for
all
everybody.
Anonymous.
Like, we only name organisations if they agree to, as Fiona has.
Or if you're interested to know if you might be amongst some of the top performers, just as Fiona is in Westpac New Zealand and ANZ, Medibank, then again, if you want to see how you stack up, it's a really great initiative to be a part of. So I'll give you one last opportunity to download the report if you haven't had the opportunity to already. But otherwise, we might just take the last 5 minutes. If anyone would like to hang around, we'll have a chat. Any other extra questions that might come through for Fiona? I think there might have been a few that will pop up in the chat, so we can get straight into that now otherwise. But otherwise, thank you so much for those who have had to jump off.
Fiona, there's a great question here from Michael. How are you demonstrating the value of Russell's time back to him? Is it just read rates, or how are you getting those engagement rates back to him?
Well, firstly, his internal communications manager is in regular communication with him and sharing those insights. So this is where Swoop just comes in so amazingly both handy and effective at being able to feed back the performance of a leader. So we can show, we can show what's happening overall, the picture overall. We also do share that more widely with the executive team so that they can see what's happening overall. We do monthly reporting. I would love to get to the stage where we were actually benchmarking the performance of our general managers and being able to give them those reports. Not quite not quite there yet, but you never know. I live in hope.
We've actually got a great case study from Syngenta, which is the world's largest agriculture company. I'll share it in the chat when I find it. And they, at their leaders conference, benchmarked all of their leaders and put it on a big screen. And it was incredible, the reaction. They had people coming up going, okay, how do I improve? How do I become an engager? So I'll share that with you. And Sam had another great question. I think this is going to be relevant to a lot of people. Have you had any senior leaders wary or reluctant to get involved in using Viva Engage? And if so, how did you encourage them?
I think everyone has. I don't think that we've ever had a time. We've had our own network here for 6 years now, and I don't think we've ever had a time in that 6 years where we haven't had a leader who's literally put the brakes on and said, no, I'm just not interested and I don't see the value in it. What we have done really is and again, I'm selling the benefits of Swoop here, but that's where the measurement is so important, and the fact that we've been able to measure what we do and show the effectiveness of a particular conversation thread or a particular campaign. We've been able to show what's happened in terms of engagement in their respective area and showcase that back to them is probably the most effective method that we've got of doing that. Look, sometimes they are just going to dig their heels in and say, look, I'm not interested. But once you get one over the line, and you can actually demonstrate that it's having a really positive effect on business performance, which we've had recently in our consumer network. We've been able to show the return on investment. You get one GM over the line, and then the others kind of follow suit because they don't want to be left out of the respective conversations.
Yeah, and bankers love data, right? So when you've
bankers
got the data to show,
yeah, this is it. They love their insights, and and they can't really deny the measures that we're showing them, and showing them over time. We've got 5 or 6 years worth of data now.
Yeah. There was a question Michael asked much earlier in the webinar. Is there a correlation between the physical characteristics of an organisation and Viva Engage adoption? It says Medibank looks to have quite a few physical locations, so do they rely more on digital collaboration? Michael, I know from Medibank's point of view, absolutely, across those 400 frontline workers across the 80 stores, that's how they communicate, that's how they share their knowledge with each other. So even something like a scam, I've forgotten his name, who was the Andrew it was that was telling us about it. So if someone comes in with a scam or something, they might just put a post up on Viva Engage in that community that we showcased and alert everybody else to it really quickly. They've said that they feel like they know each other, and I think we had that in some of the quotes from Andrew. People feel like they know each other just from interacting on Viva Engage, even though someone might be in Perth and someone might be in Hobart. So Fiona, you probably have the same experiences given you've got a lot of branches all across New Zealand.
We're very geographically spread, tiny country compared to Australia, but very geographically spread. And some of those branches don't have a lot of interaction with what we might consider head office people. And this is where Viva Engage has been fantastic. It just builds that collaborative network, and they're all there to support each other, and they love it when we run campaigns that involve them, that they can get involved with. So I think I've talked to you previously about a housing campaign that we ran, and it was a great, just a great way for them to share what's going on in their branch, share tips, share information. I don't think the physical kind of footprint makes any difference personally. I think even if you were a smaller organisation and kind of didn't have that physical presence, that that would necessarily make any difference. I think it's all in how people use it, and the passion that people have for maintaining those conversations in that network. I do say though that in the beginning that we had to do a lot of work convincing people out in those branches that why they should be using this, but once they can see the benefit, they're totally on board with it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Fiona. Emily, I'll hand over to you.
That's all good, no worries. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I know we've got a few more people hanging around, so I assume maybe some of the swoopers we're happy to sort of hang out as well if you want to stay. I know that we're at time, so appreciate everyone for coming along today. Thanks again. Download the report and we'll see you at Viva Engage Festival in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Happy to share any insights.
Oh, it's awesome to hear it.
Fantastic.
Real life.
Yeah.